Hello, everybody. With the help of our friends from the Pan-European Union, we are going to discuss now the question of resilience. Resilience has come into play, especially during the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic, because the European Union asked all the member states to come up with a plan how to be resilient to the pandemic that has happened, but also to be resilient in the future. And one of the points that is very important is, for instance, the question of food supply. And I would like to ask Professor Bašić to tell us a little bit about how he sees the situation of food supply within the European Union and especially in Croatia, because we know that all the countries are depending on each other more and more every year, and especially when it comes to food, this is a very important point. So, Professor, would you please give us your idea?
So, the question of food security and actual situation with food supply in Croatia is a special one because of Croatia is depends on import of food. Traditionally export-oriented country, Croatia is today import-oriented, and have problems, especially after pandemic. And of course, we see also the problem because of future with food security in the light of the Russian-Ukrainian actual war. We see the way out of this situation in so-known sustainable intensification of food production. What it means? It means sustainable use of resources, at first land management, and sustainable fertilizing, including of crop rotation, and of course policy which will support of this orientation. Actual policy is not so oriented.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. And coming from a German standpoint, we have the same situation, actually. We have certain products available, but we have to import a lot of other products. And that would lead me to Professor Tadić and the question, if we're talking about resilience, food production, electrical grid, water lines, everything nowadays is somehow connected to any sort of internet and computer technology. How are we looking at this from the standpoint of cybersecurity? How are we looking at this from the standpoint of national resilience? How dependent are we?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words or a few thoughts about this topic. And if you look at, for instance, the definition of computer security at English Wikipedia, you get some kind of definition which is very well balanced and comprehensive. And it's applicable to all levels, national, institutional, familiar and personal as well. And since today, actually, we, as you mentioned, we are being or getting heavily computerized in areas that have not been computerized at all before. And in certain way, you can regard computer. So I would like to approach this topic by stratification at several layers. You mentioned mission-critical systems of national security, which could be regarded as a layer of national security. These are like critical infrastructure that actually allows the state and society to function at all. You mentioned, for instance, energy grids. But this also includes not just electricity, it includes also pipelines of oil or gas. It includes very important systems, infrastructural systems like financial system, which is turned in computerized world completely, or traffic system, or even our judiciary system, which is heavily then computerized as well. Not talking only about defense systems, for instance, or broadcasting or communication systems. See, so everything is turning in IT-based systems. So all these systems heavily depend on information technologies, either at the hardware layer or the software layer, and these two together is now offering services to the citizens of all member states in the European Union. And I would say European security actually has to be composed of mapping of all these layers up to the EU level with participation of member states, I would say, equally represented and contributing. In an equal way or similar way that, for instance, the official languages for each of the member states participates equally, on equal grounds in the European affairs. In this very way, the national securities should take part in the overall European Union security.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. And it brings me to a question that I've lived here in Croatia now for 3.5 years, and I know about the meaning and the importance of the homeland war. And Professor Bašić, what I am thinking of is the sympathy that the Croatian people have for the Ukrainian people who are going through a very similar experience, also part of what the Croatian people have experienced, and also from the knowledge of that something simple and normal as food supply or food security is not normal and not simple.
In one question, a lot of problems and a lot of open question. There is problem of land ownership relation, which are not quite correct soluted in Croatia, or are in solution. After stopping the former system, which had about 20% of land in the, let's say, public ownership, like state agricultural combinat, means big farm, a farm with very high intensive agriculture. But after privatization, in our new situation, this land come in hand of people who are not so high level of, let's say, profession. They are not educated, so it is necessary or educate them and help by services like service of agricultural service in advising of there, or maybe the other form of ownership, what is, of course, from side of resilience, very slow process, and we need more years for this solution. So for a very quick solution, there are not ways in this situation. What a pity in the light of this situation in actual actual food relation in trade, in transport, in production, and so on.
Thank you very much. You made this point, and if we look at the situation in Croatia, we had Agrokor, and it was difficult enough to do the privatization of that big company. So my question would be, Professor Tadić, how competitive are we as Europeans, and what should be done on a national level and what should be done on a European level, speaking of the European Union as the association of 27 member countries? How can we move forward?
Thank you. I mean, this is a very interesting and actually important question. And if you allow me, I would like to go at a very low level, almost a lowest possible level. Technically, the problem of all these systems that we mentioned earlier, mission-critical infrastructure, which has now become more and more European size. Take the electric grid, for instance. You have now the common market, which has to be maintained. The problem is that all these systems have become vulnerable at the levels, not just malicious software, cyber attacks, or computer viruses or malware, which is usually what we perceive as a possible way of targeting these systems. But I would say the even lower level, there's a weakness at even lower level. That's the level of operating systems. And that's a problem. A lot of attention is given to computer viruses, malware. But the problems with operating systems is not usually so evident. Take Windows, for instance. Windows have a number of backdoors. And these backdoors could be exploited either by hackers with criminal intentions, whatever kind, but also by different intelligence agencies. And these backdoors have been left there either deliberately, by agreement with someone, or by programming mistakes. So programming in programming mistakes you can cover, you can patch. The problems are really the intentionally left backdoors. And in both these cases, computer security is actually breached. And when you were mentioning the Ukrainian situation, it comes as no surprise that the Russian Federation runs all its mission-critical infrastructure on proprietary Linux operating systems. They have their own developed kernel for Linux systems, and thus quite successfully shutting the backdoor entrances to the operating system. In EU and the rest of Western world, actually, we predominantly use either Windows or Apple operating systems, and very rarely, or in some server usage, there are Linux applications as well. Of course, you have special types of highly secured systems, like you have special operating system that operates Airbus 380, for instance. That's very critical, as you understand. But to the best of my knowledge, there's no regulation that requests that mission-critical systems should be run on a secure softwares that will prevent a significant number of possible intrusions. Okay? So we have, for instance, like ISO standard for secure operating systems, but it's a 15408. But it's a highly questionable at which level, up to which level this standard has been applied. So that's one of the, I would say, very basic problems that we are facing and which could become serious weakness.
Can I just pose a question to you as far as that is concerned? I just read yesterday in a German online magazine that some of the black box data of the Chinese aircraft that has come crashing down in China hint to the fact that obviously one of the pilots was by purpose getting the plane into the ground. Is there any way to prevent that from happening?
I think you had this case of Eurowings, Eurowings pilot also deliberately crashing the whole plane. Well, that's not the job of computer security. It's a job of psychiatry. And this is something what, pilots as a human critical factors in this system actually have to be evaluated very, very carefully. And that's what psychologists should do in advance or in periodical regular checkups. That's something what is absolutely necessary. I mean, there's no computer security system that will prevent or even try to think about that. I mean, that's what you may call the worst case scenario. I mean, that's a scenario that even wasn't in wildest dreams. As well as, for instance, take 9/11 situation, where you had, before that event, no one would think that there would be people as crazy as that they will deliberately crush the airplanes in skyscrapers.
Yeah, as they always say, computers don't do the damage, it's the people that do the damage. And that is the point. I would like to come back to Professor Bašić with the point that having worked in Africa and having worked in Latin America is very close to me and very important. We see an ever-increasing population in the world. We see food shortages. And I'm wondering where we as the European Union, as European states are standing, and how can we provide food security for everybody around us?
At first, it is clear the population, global population is going to be higher and higher. Climatic changes also caused some changes unfavorable for crop production, especially drought on some continents like Africa is going to be more intensive than it was in the past. That's one side of the question. The other side is intensification of agriculture, industry, traffic caused contamination, some soils, and make it unusable for agriculture. The free land which is possible to include in new agriculture is also very limited, and there is on some continents only, in South America a little, in Europe minimal. So the only way is more higher production for food security is higher production per unit of area. It means per hectare. And that also means that the most fertile soils is necessary to intensify the production. But now, the most fertile soils, 52% of European best soils are now covered by war action in Ukraine and Russia. 52%. Some of them, of course, traffic is braked. Possible of transport of food is limited already. So damages of soil by physical damages, by mines, by tanks, by bombs and so on, chemical also, are also, let's say, contaminated and limited in production of food. It means the rest of land is necessary intensification of production. On first place, in Croatia especially, is irrigation. Irrigation, so especially there where is enough of water, clean, usable for irrigation. The other side, soil drainage, there where it's possible to put some soil where it's limit the high level of underground water, or maybe flood. So that's our ways for, and of course the policy which will stimulate these processes. But policy go on one way, the situation is, let's say, changeable. Big countries, with very intensive and high agriculture, like France and Germany, make pressure to Croatia and especially former Yugoslavian countries to import the food, but they couldn't. In this situation, under this pressure, it is impossible to intensify the own production, because import by prices which are lower for our consumers are stimulative for them to buy, of course, the food imported from Germany, from France, and so on. It is necessary to find the right relation between export, import, and intensification of own production. Because of Roman Declaration, which regulate this question on global level, the basic principle is self-sufficiency. It means every country need to cover own requirements in the food, to say, by the other words, to have the own food security.
Thank you very much. I just read something last week that the German Minister for Agriculture is considering of limiting the agricultural area that can be used to produce biofuel, and instead allowing this to be a place to grow crops, which has been a philosophical and ethical question in the past. Through the war in Ukraine, has become an economical question, and a question where a lot of people are now discussing: are we growing crops to have biofuel, or are we growing crops to feed the people? Perhaps the two of you, because this is, from my understanding, this is resilience. This is critical infrastructure, if you will. Could say what you think about this.
Marginal lands. It means there are lands on high slopes, land with more limits, is possible also to use, but it's necessary for this intensification necessary to high investment. It is possible only in land with, let's say, with the economy which can invest on this way, and with policy in agriculture or agroeconomical policy so oriented. In Germany, I understand it, but in smaller countries, like I know situation in former Yugoslavian countries, within other Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the situation is not so, because problems in other branch of economy are so high that agriculture is marginalized in some cases, because of they are not competent for see the complication in this area.
Well, so if you ask me whether we should be resilient at the level of national economy and how to adapt in situations that are sort of unexpected or or even unpredicted. That depends largely on the inertia of the system. Sometimes it's much easier for smaller countries to adapt than the larger countries. Just talking in absolute numbers of inhabitants, or you can map this situation from the economical area, where you can see that very large companies hardly adapt to new trends on markets, while very small and very adaptive and flexible companies can reshape and retarget their outputs. This may also happen with the countries, providing that ruling parties or governments would accept that kind of flexible approach. And that's not always the case. And this is, I believe, one of the main obstacles for quicker adaptation.
That leads me to a very interesting question, actually. We are using computer science at every level. Local level, regional level, national level, European level, world level, obviously. My question would be, what does somebody working in, let's say, the Chupanier of Slavonski Brod have to know about the computer he or she is using? And secondly, what should we teach our children in school about the use of computers?
Thank you. This is a very important question. And you mentioned, for instance, one body of public authorities, like Županija Slavonski Brod, someone who was working there. But what we have been sort of pushed in our perception in mainstream media is that the cybercrime is always about someone attacking some system. Okay, so we should be prepared for that. We should have some kind of resilience in this respect. But we should also have in mind that in the very same time there's industrial-oriented intelligence that happens every day. And many companies actually make profit on collecting information either from publicly accessible sources, which is perfectly legal and perfectly okay. And even, for instance, gray areas in information space could be, to some extent, acceptable. But then there's also information collected in very shady ways, I would say. Let me remind you just the case of Cambridge Analytica, if you remember this scandal from 2016, that a company from UK that collected personal data of about 87 million Facebook users through the application that mimicked some kind of academic purpose survey. So people who were Facebook users actually thought that they are conducting a survey, that they have been questioned about some things, but instead this application collected information about all their Facebook contacts, and that turned, into 87 million different people. So that's a very shady way of collecting information. And of course, Cambridge Analytica made a profit on that. Subsequently, of course, Facebook was fined $5 billion by the Trade Commission, Federal Trade Commission, for the privacy violations. That's very interesting. So legal system reacted to that. And this scandal touched individuals, but we can't even imagine how this intelligence touches companies and their sensitive information. And not just companies, but also public authority bodies, like Županija Slavonski Brod that you mentioned. And of course, the computer security can be breached even in digitally based communications. So if I say that someone can intercept my text messages or phone calls or whatever, I mean, this is all computerized network traffic. And all these information packages could be taken out, selected, intercepted and read very easily. So one of the ways to not prevent it entirely, but to slow down at least, would be to access, strong encryption, publicly available keys of encryption, or blockchain techniques, but that goes beyond the scope of this talk. But another problem which I see also is digitalization of valuables. I mean, the attempt to introduce a digital currency only instead of cash has inbuilt opportunity for computer system breach, for computer security breach. So digital wallet in the near future, actually, as it is planned, will be nothing else but application that will directly communicate with a national bank or central authority that issues the digital currency and keep your account with your digital money. So you see where the perils are. And well, in spite of complexity of all security protocols, all of this could be breached, and then the losses will be of monumental scale. So please allow me, before I answer to the second part of your question, and that's, I think it's a very bad idea to convert all the currency in digital form, because a cash is a physical token of value. And because of its physical properties, it will not be losing value in such a speed as digital currency. See what I'm aiming at, the combination of analog and digital is the only safe way to preserve the value that currency should have. And I think, I'm not sure, maybe I might be wrong, I think that in Austrian constitution there is a regulation that prevents from taking out the cash financial circulation. Of course, you can say this is connected with money laundering problem and so, but I would say the pros and cons, if you put it on a scale, I think that having only digital currency has more cons than pros. And particularly if it could be controlled from a centralized point. That might be a very big threat to democracy at large, because I believe democratic system could be maintained only if it's highly distributed. And there are computer solutions to highly distributed ways of obtaining and maintaining these systems. And that's sort of security inbuilt inside instead of the other one. And talking about teaching our children, yes, when you mention children, we have some very interesting phenomenon in computer security, which has the other direction. So usually when you say computer or cyber security, everyone thinks about someone intruding, trying to get information from your systems, your data. When you talk about children, it's the other way around, actually. First thing, in family surroundings, as a parent, you would maybe like to prevent your kids of getting access to content that is not suitable for their age. So it's also computer security, but the direction is completely different. And if you allow me, I would say that not even parents, let alone children, are not actually aware of value of their personal data. And that's something what we have to build into our school systems and curricula, because having control on your personal data, and we can't even imagine what levels of personal data are being collected at the very same moment that we talk, megabytes of data about each one of us, stored, we even don't know where, and used, we even don't know for what. Have we allowed that? Did anyone ask us about that? So having control, at least about your own personal data, will become the question of your integrity at the end, and maybe also even your identity in the very future. And this is something which will become, I think, very important in this decade.
I totally agree. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and she always tells me what a dinosaur I am, since I'm still on Facebook and not on TikTok. However, we are using digital platforms which give away informations, and that is obviously always an entry point for any kind of collection of data. And what you said about the currency is very interesting, because we just recently saw the whole digital cash market break. Bitcoin and everything else that has almost gone to zero, completely gone to zero, is a very interesting question. And this would be the final question for the two of you. From your standpoint of research, I am wondering, food security, resilience, everything that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes. Is a country like Croatia up to it? Is the European Union up to it? Are we ready to challenge the things that are coming in the future?
I think really in actual situation everything depends, and everything depends on one side on the way of continental means EU economy, and of course in our normal development we can expect changes, but and of course more resilience, more elastic, but only if we are in position to be more free in decision of import-export relation, because of between seeding and harvest of every culture in agriculture, there is some months. In some months in Europe, you know, EU change all situation and policies, and so it is necessary more to be very, very elastic, and to propose to see the future, and I expect it is possible by maybe our institution like extension services, like commercial institution, our komora, kako se kaže, our chamber of economy. In the part there follow, for example, all facts about food production, and they can give the data for changes, for soon and elastic changes in food production, especially in food processing, where is Croatia, as you know, quite advanced and in a very good position. That's the way for more resilience, elastic production, and reaction on the changes on market, domestic, internal market, and of course on the continental, means EU market and global market.
Well, if you ask me about the resilience at national and European level, intellectually, yes, I would say we are close to understand what may happen, or try to come up with the worst case scenarios. Legally, absolutely not. The legal regulations are lagging behind very much. And I would say also politically, unfortunately, the political parties or the powers, the leading political parties of European countries, I would say, are not following completely or too much the question of resilience. Maybe it has been put in front as one of the buzzwords and the new topics that has to be pushed forward. But I'm afraid that in many cases this is only understood as a new buzzword that has to be followed. But let me give you, if you want, the ending word to all this that we were talking about. And I will say it primarily as a humanities scientist. I'm afraid that the complete and ubiquitous digitalization actually enables the levels of systemic computer security breaching that has overcome not just the level of decency or privacy, but it entered into the domain of, I would say, serious violation of fundamental human rights, and like privacy. And I'm old enough to have experienced how life looked like in totalitarian communist Yugoslavia. And unlike many of my Western European colleagues and people of my age, and I'm afraid that outlines of a new form of totalitarian society could be recognized. You may call it a digital totalitarianism, if you want. And in that case, the very notion of computer security will lose its purpose completely, at least at the level if we talk about personal data. And if European Union sincerely follows its fundamental principles, this is the domain where its institutions should react swiftly, I would say, and protect the fundamental human rights of its citizens and following strictly its own regulations that already exist. Take the GDPR, for instance. And unfortunately, what we have witnessed in the last couple of years was something completely different.
Thank you very much. I always try to be the optimist, so one thing that is scaring at one point but also gives me some hope at the other point is that the Croatian government, as much as the German government did, spends billion of kunas and billion of euros in putting computer technologies into school. I'm afraid that a lot of students who are in the classes know much more about this technology than the teachers that are supposed to teach them. That is scaring at one point, but it gives me the hope that there may rise a new generation who is a little bit more wiser in using this kind of technology. At least that is what I hope. So I thank you very much for both of you for this very interesting discussion. We could go on and on forever, but we will leave the crystal bowl in the shelf and see what is going to happen in future. Thank you very much.